Hey there, everybody. Welcome to our reaction and review for Black Mirror Season 6, Episode 3, Beyond the Sea. Here's this episode waiting for me. Okay, I'm just trying
Oh,
to do
okay.
the song lyric at this point. Now, we did our reviews for the first two episodes yesterday, and you can
Mhm.
see the links in the description below
Yep.
to check those out. And we got a lot of comments that were like, "Oh, I can't wait for you guys to get to Beyond the Sea." And I do get it now. Like, I really like this episode a lot. There's a lot of divided opinions about it online.
Yeah, there's a lot of divided opinions, and I kind of wonder if it's because Aaron Paul was in this episode and there was so much like hype around this
Yeah.
episode that this was just going to be like the episode to watch. There was just no way to live up to the standards. I mean, people were even making like comparisons to thinking that it was connected to White Bear because the title of the poster in the word beyond had a Y in it that looked like the upside right Y. That was the upside down Y. That was over on White Bear. I mean, I think there was just so much hype around this episode that no matter what it did, it wasn't going to live up to it.
I'm not sitting here being like I'm really good at like extracting myself from the hype, but I was
It's
actually,
hard.
it is hard, but you know what? I'm gonna pat myself on the back here because I took myself away from the hype and I watched this episode solely for what it was, and I think it's a really interesting idea. The sci-fi element I thought was really cool, and what a showcase for Aaron Paul. And I
Yeah.
it might just be my bias towards Aaron Paul that makes me love this episode so much. It's just like everybody loves Jesse Pinkman, but I like a lot of the other stuff Aaron Paul has done too. So to see him here, it just made me happy.
Yeah. And to see him in, like a space episode. Yeah. Science. It was just like such a nice connection for all of us Breaking Bad fans.
All right, well, as we go into everything further and beyond the sea, just check out that subscribe button. Go ahead, hit it. You can go beyond this video and
No.
to the rest of our coverage of Black Mirror. And also, this feels like it's a really big time for everyone out there who just loves dystopia because we're also covering Silo right now, which is
Yep.
getting close to the end of the season, but it's really great. There's still time for you to catch up if you haven't seen it. And also From, which is airing another new episode this weekend on MGM Plus. What an insanely dark and twisted and cool show that is.
Yeah, it's great. And we've also covered the first episode of The Walking Dead, Dead City, which was really good,
Yeah.
surprisingly good, because the end of Walking Dead started to get like really like
Yeah.
wah, 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 but this was really good. So yeah, we have a lot of stuff going on here at the channel, so hit that subscribe button.
Okay, you know what the most interesting thing to me about this episode is that, this is technically an episode of Black Mirror, a television show, but the more
Mhm.
that I think about it, I could have gone to Broadway and seen this episode because it's just sort of like you guys really only implemented two different sets the entire time. You had the space chamber and then you had sort of the farm environment down on Earth. You really only had four actors in the entirety of this episode, and really only three adult performers throughout. You had Aaron Paul, Josh Hartnett, Kate Mara, and it
How
really,
dare you cut out Rory Culkin?
really,
Listen, he was great. I mean, that whole beginning sequence where, David is down in his sort of robot form with his wife. It was all like, so much love. And then in comes Rory Culkin and his group of hippies that are like, we ain't here for your science,
okay. Here's the
is the
thing.
nicest way to put what happened to him and his family.
Kieran just absorbed all of the rest of the Culkins. Kieran Culkin is now the only Culkin that I'm currently
Oh my
acknowledging.
goodness. No,
See,
no.
it's just, it's weird to me. The first part of this episode kind of just gets sort of washed out in my head a little bit. And it's just like, I'm really focused on David, Cliff, Lana, this trio, how everything just sort of evolves. This is the most fascinating Lana character on Netflix since Too Hot to Handle. Like, there is a lot that is going on here.
No, like the idea of this episode was good. It was really good. There was just parts of this episode where it felt like it was kind of dragging out a bit longer and it wasn't giving the buildup that I thought it was going to bring in. I mean, we saw the David character go through a heavy tragedy where, Rory Culkin and his crew came in and wiped out his family while he was up in space. There was nothing he could do about it. His robot body was gone. He could no longer come back to Earth at all. And he still had 4 more years up in this space station where he was not going to be able to see his family. He's just alone up there dealing with the death of his entire family. I mean, it's such a dark concept for this character to be going through.
The concept was haunting and terrifying because it's also just the idea that you don't really have anybody to really kind of deal with this trauma with other than Cliff, which is why, of course, Cliff is just like, okay, I'm going to do you a solid. I'm going to let you use, my robot body, go back to Earth. You can bond with Lana. You'll have somebody else to talk to. And it felt like it felt very natural's not the right word, but I felt like the evolution of it made sense to me. I mean, the episode was probably a couple of minutes too long, but I didn't mind the pacing so much. I enjoyed kind of getting to see where things go and them getting, of course, progressively worse and worse over time. And there was a part of me that was kind of like, okay, Lana, why are you just not telling Cliff what's going on here a little bit earlier? Like, I tried to sort of justify it in my head and being like, she knows that he's up there alone with this other guy and I've got this situation under control. It's still clearly not a situation that was under control.
Yeah, I mean, we saw David using Cliff's body to he had this lifeline. So after everything that happened with his family, he was getting really inside his head. It was looking not great for him, that he just didn't want to go on anymore. Yeah, Cliff gave him this lifeline, bit of hope to be like, hey, you can, use my body, go down, you can talk to other people, you can paint, you can do all the things that'll help you continue to be healthy for this mission, not get over what happened, but see that you can still get through things and continue to be healthy for me as your partner here up in this mission. And it was working, but yes, he was starting to get too close to Lana. Lana was very lonely. When she realized it was, getting too far, she stopped it right away and was just like, nope, this is not happening. Like, you look like my husband, so it's getting really confusing for me, but I know you're not him. Absolutely no, you're crossing the line. You can't come here and do this. And it ends up getting really confused for David. And I understand he went through an incredible trauma with losing the love of his life, losing his, family, everything that happened that he had to sit there and watch, and to have this little lifeline into Cliff's life where it's like, Cliff has everything I had, but he doesn't appreciate what he has. He has a wife that's left lonely. His kid is kind of a bit lonely as well. There's no real connection there, he thinks. And so, yeah, he's like, I'll just take it upon myself. I look like Cliff, but I can give her more. And she's like, nah. And yeah, at first I was kind of like, why didn't Lana tell Cliff what was going on? But I think she thought she had enough when David disciplined their kid, that she was like, this is enough. This is going to be enough that Cliff is going to say, okay, I'm going to pull the plug on it, without her giving this extra information where I think she thought she handled it. And because they still had to work together for so many years, that she was just like, I need to not make it awkward for them up there.
That is, I think, what makes this episode so good. It's not something to smile about. I mean, this is a very dark episode, but you can sort of sense the emotional motivation for every single character involved here. It's like, I'm not sitting here reflecting on this episode being like, oh my goodness, I can't believe they did this or that. It's like, okay, I understand what Lana was thinking, and I understand for David and Cliff, you guys do have to work together. What you're doing here with allowing David to go down, that is a personal kindness. That's not the mission. That we don't actually really see that much of the mission itself. And that's still the main motivation for them being up there. So if they're up there just like killing each other, like, you're completely botching the entire reason that you're there. And I mean, obviously things take a very just horrible turn here at the very, very end of this episode, but you can sort of see the steps as to how we got here and the reasons why it builds to the way that it does, where eventually Cliff is just like, okay, David, you're done. You're not going down here anymore. He probably should have said something sooner, but for the reasons you lined out, he didn't necessarily do it. And now you've kind of reached this real point of no return for their relationship or for David's relationship with Lana.
Yeah, and I think this scene where Cliff finally confronts David and is like, that is my wife. You can't be drawing these pictures of her. You can't be
Yeah.
having this type of relationship with her. You no longer have this lifeline. So this is the second time that David has had his lifeline sort of taken away from him. He lost his family.
Yeah.
He wasn't dealing with it well. Cliff did him a kindness he didn't have to do, and he got another sort of breath of life again. And now that's taken away, where it's like he's realizing that he's now just stuck up here in space for 4 more years. The lifeline is gone. He blew it, and he knows that he blew it. But I think in this conversation, I mean, it was touched on in this conversation where David was like, listen, you don't appreciate your wife. You don't appreciate what you have. But there was something that was missing for me in that conversation that sort of built up more of that in the David character, of the trauma that he first had with everything that happened with his family, that now he has this lifeline that's being taken away from him. It felt like he was very sort of just kind of flat about it. And I'm not saying that it's, Josh's fault as the actor or it's the writing's fault. I don't know what it was, but there was just something that was kind of missing there, of just his own darkness and his own pain, of how much it really meant to him to have that lifeline, that it was keeping him alive, and that Cliff really didn't appreciate what he had of that lifeline, because it was less about his relationship with Lana for David. It was more about having that lifeline to get out of there, to have relationships, to have life outside of this space station.
Okay, we're 12 minutes into this video, so let's get heated here for a moment, everybody. I'm anticipating comments with this, because you said one thing in that last statement where you said, you're not sure if it's Josh or you're not sure it's the writing.
I wasn't sure what it was. I mean, Aaron Paul was just firing on all cylinders, and then it was like, what is going on with this David character? Like, is it his trauma? Is it Josh? Is it the writing? There was something that was missing.
I've never been the biggest Josh Hartnett fan. Like, I will just say that right now. Like, I do think he is fairly good in this episode. This is probably one of the better performances I've seen from him. However, I'm just going to throw an idea out there, and, you can let me know what you think. You guys in the comments can let me know too. Since you mentioned Rory Culkin, I'm going to put a different Rory in here. What if Rory Kinnear played the Josh Hartnett part? Like, I know how much you love Rory Kinnear, and
I love Rory Kinnear. He's one of my favorite actors. He is so good.
And I think he is so good too. And I just think if you put somebody like Rory Kinnear in that part, who we know from Penny Dreadful that he is really good at sort of playing this sort of role that's very twisted and sort of wrapped up in all these different layers of humanity.
And interestingly enough, Josh was on that show too.
No, everything is connected. Now Josh is going to call up Rory Kinnear after this video. These guys are trying to replace me with you. But it's just, no, I just think that if you had an actor who was had a little bit more of a proclivity, at least in my mind, to this sort of character in a way that Josh Hartnett just didn't fully hit for me, I think it would have worked a little bit better, just because Aaron Paul is just so good. And I think Kate Mara does a lot in this episode without even having to say a lot. Like, she doesn't get necessarily the full-on Aaron Paul monologues on that same level, but I think she's very good.
Very good.
I'm just curious, if you put somebody else in there, kind of what would have happened as a result of that. Josh Hartnett fans are going to now just, destroy the comments.
Well, here's the thing, too. Like, I was wondering, like, again, is it Josh? Is it the writing? Or could it even have been the directing? That maybe they were directing him to be too inside himself, too closed off, which is a very difficult thing to then portray on film or TV or anything like that, because then you don't really get a good sense emotionally of where they're coming from. This a trauma that's happened to David the way that it has could cause you to withdraw. And we did see that with that character a lot. However, when we saw him using Cliff's body and going back to, Earth and everything that was going on, we saw him coming back out as who he was. So it felt like by the time they got to that conversation with Cliff, where Cliff is just so enraged, he's
Yeah.
so mad, David is about to lose everything again because he's tapped back into that emotion. I expected, I think, to see more of that come out, or a desperation to be like, please don't take this away from me, and less about, please let me say goodbye to Lana. I thought it was going to be more like, please don't take this away from me. Like, I will stay away from your wife. I will stay away from your kid. Just let me have an opportunity to even go into town and have a coffee, meet some other people, do anything. Like, please. That's kind of where I thought it was going to go.
Yeah, and if that's the case, maybe it sort of is a directing thing where Aaron is playing his version of David a little bit differently than Josh is playing his version of David, and maybe there's a disconnect there. And I mean, speaking of disconnects, like, this is another thing that kind of I had to remind myself of, is that, this episode, despite it being in space, is also set in the past. And this is not a time in which mental health for men is considered a thing. Like, you were told to just shut up and sort of be strong and manly.
Suck it up.
Yeah, and really, there's a couple of things that David obviously needs here. Number one is therapy, and to be honest, even if this was present day, he's in space with one other person. I mean, maybe you can find some sort of way now to talk to somebody from afar, but that's not going to be really easy. And, the other thing here, and I mean, I'm kind of joking, but I'm also kind of not. Can someone just get him to watch a Bob Ross video or like something?
Right.
Like, no, he needs.
That's definitely going to help with the trauma of his whole family
Well,
getting
okay,
murdered,
he
Matt.
needs to be able to relax a little bit more, and the way in which he's painting, it's
my
not
goodness.
working as well. No, but what I'm
It was working. It was just working a little too well with Cliff's family. So we end up getting to this point where, Cliff has put his foot down. He's like, you're not going back to my wife or Earth or whatever. You're done. You blew it. And there's, this opportunity that David creates where he's able to actually go back. And when Cliff realizes that and he runs back, he sees that David has then gone back to kill all of Cliff's family so that Cliff can actually understand him better. And I was like, okay, I get it. Like, I get it where they were trying to go with this, but it does feel like a bit of a jump that David has gone from his trauma to having this sort of lifeline where he gets to go down and see Cliff's family and develop this relationship with Lana. And yeah, the lifeline was taken away, but does that lead then to murder? That then we see Cliff come back and David's just kicking out a chair being like, you want to talk about it? I was just like, wow, okay. Like, it was an interesting ending. I was like, okay, it makes some sense, but it felt again like the David character wasn't there. Like, I didn't see the jump from sort of this, hey, you have a family you don't appreciate, to I'm gonna kill them all. Like, where was the snap? Off screen?
I've gone back and forth in my head a lot about this, because there is a big part of me that's just like, okay, David probably would have just unalived himself, and that would have been the end of the story. And I think that's one of the directions they could have easily taken here. And I think this one is sort of born out of rage, where it's just sort of like, if I can't have the life that I want, you don't get to have any sort of life either.
Then where was the rage? That's sort of my thing. Where was it?
It feels a little bit Black Mirror wanting to do a shock ending, and
that's it 100%. They just didn't want to give away what was going to happen, but I needed to see just something, even if it was a tone in his voice. And again, is that Josh? Is that the writing? Is that the directing? It wasn't there.
One thing I will say is I'm glad that whatever happened here happened off screen with Lana. Like, I didn't need to see that. I think the visual that they did at the very end of all of this, where Cliff sort of gets there and he sees everything on it, like, that was just really messed up. And I think that was really, I don't want to say cool because it's a very horrible situation, but I think that was very well done. They could have done more with sort of the emotional build up to it, but I do feel coming out of this, You guys told a full, cohesive, interesting story.
Yep.
There's some choices that we can kind of debate over back and forth, but I just I love Black Mirror, I think, the most when it does veer into sort of elements of sci-fi, and I think this was a really cool episode based on that. This is, we've done 3 episodes so far in season 6. I think we're on the same page that Loch Henry is in last place out of everything that we've seen.
Yeah, and like I said in Loch Henry as well, it wasn't a bad episode by any means. It was just a predictable episode, and it feels like like I get what the commentary was. It was all about, crime and documentaries and how people are eating them up, and like I understand all that, but it still was just like I've seen this type of stuff before. And with Black Mirror, it needs to raise the bar. And I liked this episode more than I liked Loch Henry. And I know that a lot of people didn't like this episode. But again, I think it's like the hype of it. Like, were there some problems? Sure, there were some problems. But they took some big risks in this episode that they did not take in Loch Henry or some other things like. We'll talk about Maisie Day as well.
I really admire the creativity that went into this idea, and I'm always going to give a major round of applause to anyone out there who really swings for it. And I think they really swung for it in this episode. This is still not Joan is Awful, by the way, which is far and away my favorite of the season we've talked about so far. But I did really enjoy this episode. But of course, we want to know what you guys thought about all this. Did it work? Did it not work? Let's all tread these waters of the back and forth on Beyond the Sea.
Yeah.
Hit that subscribe button. We don't want you to miss anything else. And thanks to everybody out there who is supporting us on Patreon. And we will see you here next time.